Hello, hello. My name is Sam Hill. Welcome to the Rocket Company Webinar Jam, as we call this. We are excited. You're going to be launched live into this Google Hangout. We are going to talk about how to prep for preaching faster. Time is of the essence in all of our lives. And so we're going to talk about the most important thing that you do in your ministry, preaching, and how to do that more efficiently so that you can save time and you can preach better and also do the other areas of your life in a way that we're not stressed out all the time. If you're just pouring in to our webinar jam, as we call it, we thank you so much for being here. Go ahead, look at the chat box. There should be a chat box kind of on the side of your screen. Go ahead and just tell us who you are and where you're from. Tell us who you are, where you're located. If you're just arriving, you have arrived at the right place. How to prep for preaching faster. My name is Sam Hill. I'm a team leader with the Rocket Company. We are excited. We are pumped that you are here. Wes is here. Nancy is here from Kansas. Wes, where are you from? Kevin, South Carolina. Joe is here. Joe, where are you from? Bill in Iowa. Harrisonburg, Virginia. Wow, Greg Thomas and Joe, welcome. Preston Tyler, welcome. Pastor Larry, welcome. Billy in West Georgia. All right, Wes. I went to UGA, man. Go Dogs. Are you a Dogs guy, Wes? Memphis, Tennessee. Michael and Jamie. If you're just arriving, Brian from Trinidad and Tobago, thank you so much for being here. Hey, we're excited that you're here, okay? My name is Sam Hill. I'm a team leader at the Rocket Company. You are live. We are at the world headquarters of How to Preach Faster this afternoon, all right? I'm actually just in my office. So, I'm in my office, and we're going to talk today about how to prep for preaching faster, how to do it more efficiently, so that you can preach and deliver better sermons more effectively. And during the week, as you get ready for your sermon, get ready for college ministry, for youth ministry, student ministry, wherever you find yourself. If you are preaching, if you are teaching, what we're going to talk about today is how to get ready for that moment, okay? That snapshot. Maybe it's a 15-minute slot for you. Maybe it's an hour. Maybe it's an hour and a half. Who knows how long you're going to stand up there and preach. But we're going to talk about how to make the most of your prep time leading up to that moment, all right? And how to be more efficient. As you're coming in, if you wouldn't mind, open up the chat. Just tell us who you are and where you're from so that we know who's joining us today. We thank you for your valuable time. We're going to begin our content here in about 2 to 3 minutes. We're going to respect your time today. And I'm going to be sharing my screen. I'm going to go off of video here in a couple minutes. And I want you to just have a face for the name here and the voice. And I'm going to share a slide presentation that I have, and we're going to give you everything that we've got. If you've been a part of one of our webinars before, we give you things you can apply. It will impact your week this week. Like right now, you're going to leave this time equipped with something that will make a difference as you go toward Sunday morning. That's our goal. Samuel is here from Virginia, Stan in Baltimore, Mike from ATL. We got Thomas War Eagle. How about that? They are everywhere. They are everywhere. Wes said he's got no dog in the fight. Brian, will there be a replay of this? There will be, but stay with us, my friend. Stay with us. Don't go anywhere, right? Roy from Arizona. Rod from Chapel Hill. We got a Tar Heel with us today. All right. We are excited that you are here. You arrived to how to prep for preaching faster, okay? So you're less stressed. You have more time with family and other things that are important in your life as well, without sacrificing quality, right? One of the reasons why we can be nervous about prepping for preaching faster is we're going to sacrifice quality, but you don't have to. I'm going to show you how you don't have to. Joel is here from Idaho. Nancy says my camera is not stable. It's shaking. Probably because I'm shaking my desk. I'm sorry. I'll try not to shake my desk. So I'm not on an easy train. I'm in my office, as I call it, the world headquarters. Audio is not that good. Can everybody hear me okay, or should I crank it up more? Simon says that. Bernard and Gail are saying the same thing. Is this any better? Can you hear me okay? And I can talk loud if I need to. Samuel from Greensboro, North Carolina. In and out, trying to turn it up here. All right, give us just a second. We're going to try to work on the audio here. Is this any better at all? Jamie says it's good. Is this any better at all? All right, somebody just texted me and said it's better. All right, that's better. Okay. We're working on it here. Ron says it's better. Joe says yes. All right, look at all his yeses. Okay, all right. Boom, we're ready. Okay. Thank you, thank you. Hey, we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Sam Hill. I'm a team leader with the Rocket Company, and what we're going to talk about today is how to prep for preaching faster. Okay, and Haley is going to be in our chat room if you have questions about sermon prep. Okay, if you're in children's ministry, youth ministry, student ministry, college ministry, you're the mainstay preacher, maybe you're a substitute preacher, whatever it is that you do where you are preaching, that crucial time that can be very stressful, you should be able and you want to enjoy that time. The way to make it where it's enjoyable and you're not stressed happens in your prep, and that's what we're going to talk about. I'm going to share my screen here, so I will go off of video just so you know, and that way you can see my slide deck. And Haley, if you just want to text me maybe and let me know that that you can see it okay, that would be fantastic. Here goes my screen share. All right, how's that? Can you see it okay, everybody? Haley, talk to me. All right, how about that? Full screen? Cool. All right, great. Let's talk about how to prep for preaching faster. Okay, so you're less stressed, you can have more time with family and not sacrifice quality. Okay, and my goal is to give you 3 practical ways to prep for preaching faster. 3 practical ways that you can leave with today, apply them immediately, and your prep will be faster, more efficient. Your sermons will be better if you stick with these strategies. And if you stay to the end, we do have a bonus resource for you. That bonus resource is we're going to give you 10 ways to get unstuck in your sermon prep. Put a 1, the number 1 in the chat box if you've ever been stuck in your sermon prep, just staring at the screen, and you are stuck on an introduction, you are stuck for an illustration, you're not quite sure what to do next. We're going to give you 10 ways to get unstuck, and I'm going to cover some of that here in my content. So what makes this different, okay? Well, I just want to talk about, we're not here for seminary class, okay? There's a time and there's a place for that. This isn't it. We have been talking with church leaders for over a decade at the Rocket Company, 10,000 churches that we've interacted with, and they've been through our coaching and implementation models. Nobody asks us about Bible interpretation and how to interpret a passage. They all ask us, how can we have systems in place that will actually allow us to enjoy and excel in ministry? So what we're going to talk about today is how to be less stressed. We're going to talk about how to have more time, how to be more efficient and impact the right here, the right now. I want you to know who I am. My name is Sam Hill. I'm a Rocket Company team leader. I've been local church preaching leadership for 2 decades. I'm a public speaking consultant, passionate about helping pastors enjoy ministry. That is what gets me fired up. No matter what your context is, that you're actually enjoying what you're doing, right? My wife, Kristen, 2 kids, Kane and Marcus, and I've got a 70-pound poodle. That's something unique about me. Was never part of the plan when I signed up for this, but there he is, and I am his guardian and provider. Listen, I've done a lot of things right when it comes to preaching and it comes to public speaking, when it comes to sermon and preaching prep. I coach people on how to do it, but I've done far more wrong things than I have right, and I've learned from those. I'll give you a couple of examples. I used to have a sprint mentality, a sprinter's mentality when it comes to preaching. And a sprinter's mentality is where you constantly push preaching off for the urgent. Everything takes precedent. You always schedule it in, but you never start when you say you're going to start. When you do get started, your phone rings, your text bells go off, and you put it off back an hour, you put it back a day. And at the end of the day, I always just said, well, hey, at least I know I can cram. Remember, we all used to cram in school. Put a 1 in the chat box if you ever crammed for school, maybe in middle school, high school, or college. You cram. Cramming is when you take what you should do over the course of a longer period of time and you condense it into a very short amount of time and just try to get it done. That's what cramming is. That's what sprinting is. And I used to do that, constantly sprinting toward the finish.
I'm going to start on Tuesday. I'm going to start on Wednesday. I'm going to start on Thursday. Next thing I know, it's Saturday night. I'm finishing up dinner, telling my wife and kids, hey, see you later. I'm going to be gone, and I'm going to stay up all night long, and I'm going to write a sermon that should have been done a long time ago. Sprinter's mentality is a surefire way to get burned out when it comes to preaching. And I used to do that, which always results typically, or not always, but a lot, right, in poor delivery, not a lot of confidence, and not a lot of time with family when you're in the sprinter's mentality, right? I was constantly at the mercy of, I got to get this done, I got to get this done, I got to get this done, and ultimately leads to exhaustion. This is why burnout, one of the reasons why burnout is so prevalent among people in ministry, is because they don't have systems in place, and because they don't have systems in place, they're constantly sprinting. The Olympics are coming, and sprints are not made to happen every single week, and you're constantly sprinting. Preaching is a marathon. So after doing this for years, I recognized that until I owned the sermon prep calendar, that sermon prep would own me and would own my family. Until I owned the sermon prep calendar, I would always have a reason to give in to what I call the tyranny of the urgent, right? Until I had a system to prep, I would never be confident in delivery. I'm going to posit to you today that sermon systems, preaching prep systems are crucial to not only having a life and not being stressed and having more time with family, but also delivery and impact. One of the things that happens is preachers can feel like if I have too many systems in place and it's too organized and too systematic, then it won't be spiritual, the Holy Spirit won't be in it, and on and on and on. Not true, okay? Not true. There's lots of, I used to go to bonfires as a kid. There's lots of bonfires. Best way to start a bonfire is through a structure of lots of logs put up against each other in the middle, and you pour gasoline on it, and you start a massive bonfire. Structure is crucial if you want to avoid exhaustion and have fantastic sermons. So I discovered that the hard way, okay? I used to sprint. I was personally stressed out, and my delivery declined, okay? That's the hard way. Sermon prep starts on Tuesday. It's on my calendar. That's the time you say it's going to start, whenever it is for you, which turns into Thursday, turns into a cram session. Guess what happens when you cram? Well, you cut corners, right? You don't read commentaries like you should. You don't feel clear on the central point. You don't practice. You don't pray, which is really important. So you cut corners, and that's where you begin to struggle and you find exhaustion. I want to give you a better way that will help you complete sermons efficiently. In the past 10 years, I've delivered my best sermons, okay? And it didn't come from going to take more seminary classes, more time prepping, or becoming an all-star preacher overnight. I'm a really average, just normal dude. I got a full family. I got a full plate. And I have relied heavily on systems. And I've found with the more systems have come better quality and more focused, more impact in preaching. My results aren't typical, though. I want to be really clear, because a lot of times we're so busy in ministry, you want a silver bullet, and this isn't it, okay? I don't have any silver bullets to offer you today. I do have process. I do have systems and organizations, but you got to be willing to change some of what you're doing and try new things, which is really, really hard, okay? If you don't own the preaching calendar and the sermon prep calendar, and it owns you, it is a very difficult battle to turn that tide, okay? It can be done, but it is difficult, and it will not happen overnight. You have to focus on implementation of a system. You can't just attend a webinar and then go back to doing the same thing, okay? Again, you can't attend a webinar and going back to do the same thing that's not working. You have to implement something new. You have to understand preaching's a marathon, not a sprint. Slow and steady wins the race. I was thinking this past week, I jotted down 10 names of preachers that I respect that have drastically impacted my preaching. And I went down that list and I look and I said, you know, it's slow and steady. It's slow and steady. They aren't constantly reinventing the wheel. They have a model that they follow. And I know what I can expect, and it's consistency. It's a healthy breakfast, right? Sometimes preaching's a feast. You hope it's not famine. If you can just give a healthy breakfast, hey, your people will going to be a lot better off in the long run than feast and famine, feast and famine, feast and famine. Too much preaching is feast and famine, and that's directly correlated to sermon prep. All right, so let's talk about what it looks like. I want to give you what I call 3 secrets to actually prepping for sermons faster, okay? 3 secrets. They're really simple. Number 1, have a simple sermon model, and I'm going to give you one here in just a second. Number 2, don't get stuck. A lot of preachers get stuck on one thing and they never end up making progress throughout the week. And number 3, own the sermon prep calendar, or the urgent will own you. And I'm going to give you some practical ways that you can own the sermon prep calendar. Let's get right to it. Have a simple sermon model. Keyword, simple. Okay? Keyword, simple. You know, one of the first times I ever preached, I was delivering my message, and I had a mentor that was somewhere, you know, in the first row or 2, and I was delivering this message, and I was getting through it. It's a little nervous. You know how it is. It's your first time, one of your first times, and I'm going through it, and I remember I was probably, I don't know, 30 minutes in, and I looked at him, and he took his hand, and I wish I had my video on, but he kind of took his hand and he pointed it downhill, right? Just took his hand like he was flying a plane downhill. And when the time was over, I went and I said, hey, what was the deal? Like, you're doing these weird hand motions. I mean, what's that about? We didn't cover that when it came to you coaching me on him preaching. And he said, man, I was just asking if this plane was ever going to land. I mean, are you going to land this plane or not? You've been talking, where are you in your sermon? When is it going to end? When are you going to take us to the finish line? You didn't seem like you knew where you were, so we don't know where you are. And so he developed this concept with me about having a sermon GPS, right? So you know where you are in your sermon. And I encourage a simple sermon model that you repeat week after week. When we talk to preachers sometimes and we ask, hey, like, what's your process for prepping a sermon? A lot of times it's like, well, I open the text, I sit down, I start writing, you know, but how do you know where you are in the actual sermon? I mean, how are you gonna know when you actually finished a sermon, right? During the week, a lot of times when it comes to sermon prep, some preachers don't even know when they're finished with the sermon. So that's one of the reasons why they're stressed, is because it's never done, never done, never done. And they're in the front row on Sunday morning during worship time making notes on their sermon because they don't really know when it's finished. There's not a finish line. There should be a start and an end to not only your sermon, but your sermon prep. You should know when your sermon prep begins. You should have different checkpoints along the way, and then your sermon itself will follow. I use a really simple sermon model so that I always know where I am. I know where I am in my message. I know where I am in my prep. My simple sermon model is just an airplane ride. Really simple. I used to travel a lot. I still travel a good bit. The middle pictures are some pictures I took actually last month out west. But my sermons have a takeoff, they have a cruising altitude, and they have a landing. That is my simple sermon model. All of my prep flows through this model so that I know where I am in my preparation, and I know where I am when I'm actually in the middle of my sermon in front of people. I want to flesh this out a little bit because I hope you can take this and actually learn something from it. Takeoff, here's where we're going, right? When you get on a plane, what does the pilot, what does everybody say? Hey, thanks for being here. This is our destination today. This is how long it will take. This is what you can expect. And maybe they crack a joke or whatever. And you don't have to crack a joke. So I'm not acting like you got to crack jokes in your sermon. You get the point. You are taking off. You're introducing the topic, the passage, yourself, whatever it is, it's takeoff. Then I get to cruising altitude. When I get to cruising altitude, this is where, right, when you're cruising over the west, what does the pilot say a lot of times? Hey, out the right-hand side of the plane, you're going to see the Grand Canyon or whatever. And there's a picture there. Well, when I'm in my cruising altitude, my goal is to help them observe and take note of the most important things in this passage. It's the main point of the passage, and then I make 3 sights, 3 observations, 3 things I want them to see. That is the cruising altitude. I know exactly where I am in my sermon. Sit back, relax. This is where the beverage service comes. Everybody's just relax. Just listen for a few seconds, all right? And then landing, okay? Hey, here are your connections, right? What do you do when you land? You pull up to the airport. I fly in and out of Atlanta a lot, and there's a gazillion gates. And I think about this when it comes to application for sermons. Hey, if you're headed into this phase of life, right? If you're a mom, if you're a dad, if you're a plumber, if you're this, if you're that, if you're struggling here, you're struggling there, let me make a connection for you from this passage. It's application. Takeoff, cruising altitude, and landing. I even assign some time limits, some time constraints to these, right? Because there's nothing worse than sitting on the runway, taxiing, and you never take off. There's stuff in the news about that. People hate that. They don't like sitting there. So I put some time constraints so I know, hey, here's about how long I want to stay in takeoff mode. Let's get to cruising altitude, man. Let's go. Then I get to cruising altitude. I know about how long I'm going to spend here. Obviously, the majority of my time is going to be in cruising altitude because it's the most important part where I'm going to be talking about the content, the point of the passage, really what they should be learning. And then I'll finish with landing time. You know, if you're in cruising altitude too long, what do people start to do? They start to look at their watch. They start to ask the flight attendants, hey, are we ever going to get here? When are we supposed to get here? Right? And so I know I'm going to have a landing. I begin to go down and talk about connections. And as my coaching mentor showed me once upon a time, I got to land the plane. You got to land the plane. My question for you today is, what's your motto? What's your model for preaching a sermon? What is your model for preaching a sermon? Could you draw your model out like this? My challenge to you is, if you can't draw it out literally on a napkin very quickly, very simply, I challenge you to get one where you can. When we ask preachers, hey, what's your model for preaching? Well, I just try to be as passionate as I can. It's not a model, okay? Well, I try to just make sure I get the main point across. Great. How will you get it across? Through what framework? How will you know if you're getting it across or not? What are your landmarks? What are the different ways that you assess that? Well, I just want to be faithful to the text. Great. We all do. But what's your model for being faithful to the text? How will you know if you've been faithful to the text? What does that actually look like and play out? And can your people follow? So I encourage a simple sermon model. The how. How will you actually be passionate? How will you get the main point across and make sure that people are following you and understanding? If you're not clear on your sermon model and how it works and where you're going, your people will not be either, for sure, right? Your people will not be either. Think about every other area of our life. This is interesting to me. I was thinking about this. If we are working out and we go to the gym, usually you follow a model. You're trying to build muscle, trying to lose weight, whatever it is, your treadmill, you have a plan. You have a specific regimen that you're going through. Same thing with the diet. Remodeling a house, building a house. I want the house to be up to date. Cool. What's that going to look like? Well, we're going to do demo first, then we're going to put in studs, then we're going to do finish work. That's a model. You don't go in there with your tools, throw your tools around, and you hope something happens. You follow a specific process. Having a sermon model, a simple sermon model that you can draw on a napkin, will enable you to prep for sermons faster, more efficiently. And if you do it week after week and you stick with your model, it becomes a mental map in your mind. A lot of times when we talk to a preacher, it's like, yeah, I got lost. I just couldn't seem to keep my focus. It's because you just don't even know where you are in the sermon, right? You have to know and be able to ask yourself, am I in takeoff right now? Am I at cruising altitude yet? Or am I in the landing and descending down here to apply? You've got to know where you are. And if you have a simple sermon model and you are on a Sunday morning, even if you struggle and, you know, if you use a manuscript or whatever, you're going to know where you are. So I encourage a simple sermon model. Let's talk about secret number 2. Don't get stuck in your prep, okay? Put a 1 in the chat box if you've gotten stuck in your prep recently. Stuck looks like, hey, I can't think of an introduction. You just open up Microsoft Word, Pages, or however you do it, and you just stare. You just look at the screen. I can't think of an introduction. Can't think of an illustration. I don't understand the passage. Here's the thing. When you get stuck, you start to avoid prep, okay? You need to make this correlation. When you get stuck in your sermon prep and you can't think of something, you begin to avoid the sermon prep altogether, right? You push away from the table, you take a break. Well, I'll just later. I'm obviously something's not clicking, whatever it is. And oftentimes that will compound the prep problem and stress, right? Because now you're avoiding it because you're having a difficult time. You cannot get stuck for a long period of time when you're prepping for sermons. And if you're getting stuck, you have to have a way to get unstuck, okay? Maybe you remember the show Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? I think what it was called. And they used to ask the question, they would always say, hey, can I phone a friend? And my question for you today is, who's in your bullpen that you can phone when you are stuck on something? I want to be loud and clear. There is sometimes today this perception that preachers are supposed to get up there and like a rock star, be perfect and on week after week after week after week, and they're the one who brings the magic and all this stuff. You got to get that out of your head, okay? Not only does the Bible not teach that, but you have to accept that you're going to get stuck and you need help. If you prepare for sermons on an island by yourself in a silo, you are going to struggle, and you have to figure out a way to get unstuck. I tell you, I used to have a very full bullpen that I developed, and once upon a time I said to myself, you know, this is crazy. This expectation that I've got to be a know-it-all all the time, 24/7, every single Sunday, and have all the answers is crazy. This is crazy. And so my first bullpen experience was I was stuck. I was struggling to understand how a particular passage had been applied throughout church history. I had a church history question. And I had read different books. I had read different commentaries. It's like, man, I just don't get this. I don't know how to explain this. This is not clicking for me. And I picked up the phone and I called a friend of mine who had a doctorate in church history. And I ran this question by him. And in 5 minutes, he gave me a clear, concise answer that brought the whole thing into view for me. And he could tell that I was just hesitant. He said, hey, why won't you call me on things like this? I don't understand. And I was like, I don't know. I think I just feel like embarrassed, and I shouldn't be. Like, it's my sermon. It's my job. I should be preaching the sermon. I just don't feel like I should be asking for help. And he's like, that's crazy. I've got a doctorate in church history. We have other people in the church that have, degrees in counseling. Do you have all these degrees? Or do you know it all? And I was like, no, I don't. He's like, well, why won't you ask for help? So who is in your bullpen? Okay. If you want to get unstuck in your preaching, you have to develop a bullpen. You know what a bullpen is in baseball, right? It's relief. It's about relief. You got to get rid of the hero complex. You got to get rid of the lone survivor. You got to get rid of the, I've always got to be original. I've got to do it all my own way all the time. You got to get rid of that. That whole mentality is a surefire way for you to be burned out, be super lonely, and feel unbelievable amounts of stress, exhaustion, and anxiety. I'm not saying shuck your responsibility. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying you can't and you won't ever know everything. And you have to be willing to admit that, and you have to be willing to get people in your bullpen who will help you in your preaching get better, and you can bounce things off of them. For example, develop a bullpen list. Here's who I typically have in my bullpen. I have a church history person who can help me with context. They can help me understand what the church has thought about this and wrote about this and applied different parts of the Bible over the course of redemptive history. I have a counselor in my bullpen list, somebody who does counseling. They counsel people with the Bible. I got other types of counselors I talk to help with application, because they talk to so many people all day long. They hear everybody's problems 24/7. They're going to have a really good idea of how somebody might be struggling with a particular part of life that will be relevant for my sermon, and I might have an application for those types of people. I like to have a great communicator in my bullpen. Somebody who's doesn't even have to be a church person. Could be somebody who does public speaking full time. Could be a business person. I'm being serious. Could be a business person who's just really good at delivering content to people in a way that they can understand. And they're great with illustrations. I have another person in my bullpen. His name is Josh. He's great with illustrations. And the reason he's great with illustrations is because he is a business leader, and he's also very well read. And he has a unique ability to take different things, quickly relate them to literature and things in culture, and develop illustrations just on the fly, uncanny ability. I'll never have the ability that he does. I bounce stuff off of him all the time. Hey, I don't understand this. How would you describe this to me? How would you relate this to people that would be actually understandable for them? You got to have a bullpen list, a Bible expert, somebody who's just really good with understanding passages. They know apologetics, all this stuff. Again, remember, you're not going to know everything all the time. It is to your advantage to develop a bullpen list where you can get help and bounce things off of people. Put a 1 in the chat box if you have somebody in your bullpen. Maybe throw out just the type of person that it is. Who's in your bullpen? Or put a 1 in the box if you want a bullpen. You know that you need one. And then a great person to have in your bullpen list are other preachers, preferably in your own church. That would be great, because hopefully they're giving you a chance to have a break in preaching, and so you can all be on the same page and learn from each other and have a nice, healthy atmosphere and culture of talking and giving each other critique and feedback. But that's another great person to have in your bullpen list, is other preachers. We're all gifted differently. Some of us, when it comes to preaching, I don't know if you were on a webinar a couple months ago with Matt Adair, he talked about how some preachers are great storytellers. Some are great at apologetics. Some are great at relating to culture. Some are great at being super passionate. Some are great at winning the lost. We don't all have all those skills, all those gifts all the time. Your bullpen is there for you to be able to have a sounding board so that when you get stuck, you can actually call somebody, phone a friend, as I call it, on your bullpen list and get their help. And listen, this doesn't mean that you're calling these people every week. So I'm really clear. We're all on the same page. I'm not saying they all do your job for you. I'm saying that when you get stuck in your sermon prep, and maybe you get stuck with a lot of the same thing, maybe you get stuck with openings, maybe you get stuck with illustrations, maybe you're stuck on interpretation. If you're stuck on one of those, build out your bullpen a little bit deeper on each of those issues. I'm saying find people that you can call and bounce things off of. And I want to give you a script to do that, because I want you to know, I get asked all the time, hey, I heard you use a bullpen system. Absolutely, I do. I don't know it all. I've got people that can help me when I get stuck. How do you get them to agree to be in your bullpen so you can call them? This is what I do. I call them. Hi, my name is Sam. I'm with Christ Church. And obviously, I'm not this formal because I know most of these people. But listen, I'm just trying to put some preaching systems in place that will allow me to preach better sermons more consistently. One of the things I'm doing is building a short list of people I could contact when I get stuck on something. I know that you do a lot of counseling, for example, and I feel you could really help me with application. So instead of going at it by myself, if I get stuck, I'd rather just humble myself, call it and bounce off you. I know you stay busy. I promise I'm not going to do it every week. I'm not going to wear you out. Just wondering if you would be open to a quick 5-minute brainstorming session with me here and there as your schedule allows. If you ever can't answer the phone, don't answer it, right? You'd be shocked how many people are like, of course, I wish you'd have asked sooner. I'd be glad to help you. It must be lonely preaching. It must be lonely feeling like you've got to come up with all the answers all the time, and you have a life too. And you'll also be surprised how it develops leadership in your church fast, and how you will begin. Number one thing we hear, I would say top 3, okay, from preachers is, I just wish I could have a break. Well, if you're not talking to anybody about preaching in your church, and you're the only one who's the rainmaker in your church, you're not going to find other preachers. You're a lone survivor. You're the only one doing it. So you'd be surprised if you want to develop other people that can preach and give you a break and build out a team. This is one of the best ways to do it. You'd be surprised how many counselors could get up there and preach when you need a break. You'd be surprised how many professors, how many people that, were in Bible college once upon a time, how many people in your mix could preach if you would just start that dialogue. So secret number 1, have a simple sermon model. Secret number 2, do not get stuck. You cannot get stuck for a long period of time is what I mean. We all get stuck, but you can't stay there, which creates this avoiding thing, and so on. And if you stay to the end of this webinar, we've got 10 ways to get you unstuck, additional ways on top of this. Secret number 3. And you know what, before we get to this, hey, Haley, are there any questions on the first 2? I can't see the chat box, so I'm going to rely on you here. Any questions that pertains to getting stuck or simple sermon models that might be something we could talk about real quick?
Yeah, definitely. We've had several questions, Sam, from bivocational pastors who say, we have a lot going on. We're working another full-time job. How do we create enough time to really prepare for sermons?
I love it. I love it. My next point is going to talk a lot about that. I've been bivocational too. I grew up in a traditional business world, and for sure, I would say the 2 biggest things is, number 1, you got to figure out how to own your calendar, and I'll talk more about that. But it's all going to relate back to the sermon model, okay? Too many times we say, well, I'm just going to devote an hour tonight and 2 hours tomorrow night or whatever. And even if you put time slots down, if you don't know what you're trying to accomplish, it's not going to help you, okay? So you've got to be efficient with your time. And so I'll give you an example. When I'm coaching a preacher and they say, I say, where are you at in your sermon prep right now? Using my first call. Well, I'm about 40% done. Well, 40% done, what does that mean? Well, I just feel like I'm almost about halfway done with it. So you feel like you're almost halfway done. You're just constantly going to be spinning your wheels if you don't have point A, point B, point C, checkpoints like you would do when you're running a race, running a marathon, working out, right? When you work out, you do 5 sets of 10 reps. When you run a race, you do in mile 6, mile 12, there's mile markers. Life is about signposts, okay? But so many times when it comes to preaching, it's like, I'm just going to start traveling down this road, and we treat preaching like we're hitchhiking, right? Trying to get from Los Angeles to New York. It's going to be a long walk if you don't know exactly where you're trying to get to. So that would be my answer there. What else we got, Haley?
Yeah, this is from Bernard. He asked, do you think it's always necessary to have 3 points in your sermon?
No, not at all. There's not one right way to do it. I mean, listen, you can look throughout the Bible, and whether you want to look at Jesus himself, you want to look at the disciples, you want to look at the structure of something like Romans, the whole book of Romans and what Paul did. There are lots of different models for delivering the text, delivering the point, whatever type of preaching your church employs. So it doesn't have to have 3 points. I do think that like some type of system, some type of organization is important. Not everybody agrees on that. Some guys like to get up there and shoot from the hip, and it's all about passion. It's, you know, all about just making it happen in the moment, and they follow. And I get all that, because, man, if there's one thing I'll get a bad email about when this is done, it's going to be guys saying, hey, you know, what about the Holy Spirit? What about this? You just act like, no, I'm not saying any of that. I'm just saying that the number one thing we get asked every single week at the Rocket Company is stuff about life. How can I do sermons where I'm not constantly stressed out, shooting from the hip, and I've got actually a system down? And so I think that some type of organization, whether it's 3 points, 2 points, 1 point, you know, one of the most impactful books I've ever read, Andy Stanley, when he talks about communicating and his mind maps and things like that, it's great. But again, it's simple, and he knows where he's going. So if it's 1 point or 10, as long as you know where you're going, your people are going to know where you're going. So I do think that's important. Let's take one more, Haley, if you've got it.
Yeah, here's one from Preston. He asked, what processes or steps do you take within the cruising altitude to find the main point of the passage?
Great question, Preston. So I do a couple things. The way that I do it, and there's lots of ways that are great. I will typically, I utilize commentaries. And so when it comes to cruising altitude, I'm going to typically, number one, I'm going to obviously read the text myself. I'm going to make my own deductions from it, what I think the text is saying. And then I'm going to begin to reference that so that I don't import my feelings, my interpretation into Scripture. Scripture should inform the way that I think, the way that I feel, the way that I'm going to talk about it. I shouldn't be taking passages like a gunslinger and making them say things that they never meant to say. And so the way that I do that is I take my own, observations from the text. I write what I think is the main, and then I compare it to different leaders, preachers, experts on this area. So I try not to do too much of that. There's a danger, I think, of, all of a sudden you got 10 commentaries all over your desk, and you feel like nobody knows what the point of the passage is. And so I just try to make sure, hey, do I feel like I have a clear enough understanding of what this is saying? And I've got a couple different sources that I've gone to that also are in a similar place. And a lot of times maybe I'm wrong, and I have to just kind of relearn, rethink what that text is saying. So I do my own study, my own, application, if you will, my own, I synthesize what I think it's saying, and then I compare that. Typically, I try to do no more than 3 commentaries. I try to stay away from other sermons. I found for me, I can start to just regurgitate something somebody else has said, and I'm just like, well, that's a great line, that kind of stuff. So I try to avoid that. And then I would say, lastly, in my bullpen, I've had preaching teams, which is something we talk about in one of our modules, Preaching Rocket. But, I've had something in place for a while where somebody has the main point from my sermon early and often in my preaching routine, and so I've got somebody else maybe in my church, preferably, where I'm saying, hey, this is what I'm going to say about this. This is what I think it's supposed to mean. This is why I think that. Can you just look it over too? And so that also can help. All right, great questions. I'm going to keep rolling, okay? Secret number 1, we talked about having a simple sermon model that you use week after week after week. Secret number 2, do not get stuck. If you get stuck, have ways to get unstuck. Don't stay stuck for long is the point. Secret number 3, own the sermon prep calendar, or the urgent will own you. And somebody just asked about this, so this will be helpful, I hope, learning some about that. You've got to own your calendar, okay? Most of the time, our calendar owns us, especially the urgent. And if you think about the amount of urgent items in our lives, the list is basically endless. People that want something from us in an urgent fashion, okay? Spouse, kids go to the doctor, somebody's at the hospital, you're sick. You've got all types of pressing issues in the church. People are sick in your church. Marriages are going downhill. You got all types of stuff. People going wayward across the board. So you got pressing issues at church. Dog, I got a dog, right? Something blows up at the office. So, I mean, there's so many urgent things. Okay, let me put it this way. There is no lack of urgent things. Urgent things will never, ever, ever, ever go away, okay? And some preachers fall into this trap where they think, well, I'll get into a regular sermon routine when things cool down, right? How many times have we said that? Well, there's a lot of stuff going on right now. When it cools down, I'll really be able to focus. Hey, it's never going to cool down, okay? It's never going to cool down. If you're in ministry, there's no cool down period. You have to carve out the time, own the calendar, and create also breaks for yourself. The number one thing that keeps pastors from their best messages is time. It's the number one thing. So when we coach different pastors and preachers and they're struggling, we say, what are you struggling? I'm struggling with whether it's application in the sermon, whether it is praying. I'm just not praying. I'm just getting up there and talking. I haven't even prayed in months about a sermon before I deliver it. It all goes back to time. Everything could be, what if I had more time, then I would have done this to make it better, and I'd be less stressed. It all goes back to time. And so it's like, hey, how do I own the calendar, right? That's the question. So let's talk about it. You've got to schedule actual time slots. And I want to be clear, when you schedule time slots, I recommend that you specifically turn off technology. Let me say that again. I specifically recommend you turn off technology, even if you got to put your phone in airplane mode, whatever. And I get asked all the time, hey, but what if my spouse has an emergency? What if this? You need to create what if systems, okay? Plain and simple. Stop letting the what ifs run your calendar and instead create systems to take care of the what ifs. Whatever that looks like for you is fine, okay? So I'll tell you what I do. My wife has an issue where she absolutely needs to get a hold of me right away. She can drop me an email, and that email has a way where it'll ping me and say, hey, I've got an emergency. Or sometimes I'll shut off where when it comes to my text, I'll only look for her text, whatever it is, and it's 911. That's the emergency code for my wife, 911. And sometimes it is 911. I've got 2 boys, so when my wife says 911, I'm usually heading to the ER for somebody bumped their head. But you've got to have some type of system in place, okay? I've had an autoresponder before, meaning I have a pre-made message on my email and I saw one actually a couple months ago from a pastor that uses some of the Rocket Company material, and I love this. I sent this pastor an email, and I immediately got an autoresponder back, and the email said something like, hey, thanks so much for your message. It's so good to hear from you. Listen, my number one responsibility week in and week out is to get up and preach on Sundays. Right now at this time, I'm having dedicated time toward that. If you have an emergency, you need to get a hold of a leader at the church right away. This is what you need to do. And they had another person's contact information. Fantastic way for him to have a system for what ifs and give him time to focus on the message. Listen, the average pastor, if you think about the different urgent little technology ticks that we get pinged with, I mean, the average pastor is reading emails. Some pastors are reading personal email like samhill@gmail, and they're reading church emails. They got 2 separate email accounts they're monitoring. Some have 3. You got blogs that you monitor that you get pinged about. You got Twitter on your phone that you're getting pinged. You got Facebook, get the news stories, Facebook Messenger. Then you got hobbies that you're getting pinged about all the time. For me, it's sports. I love sports. I follow all the, I'm getting pinged on sports, scores and trades, and Tim Duncan retired and all this stuff. I mean, you just tally up the amount of urgent pings that we can get through technology. There's no way that you're going to be able to own your calendar if you don't get control of the urgent pings. It's not going to happen. So you've got to figure out a system, an emergency system, so that you can actually schedule time slots that matter, okay? Because almost every preacher we talk to, they've got the time carved out. But the question is, when you have it carved out, is it actually carved out? Or are you dashing out the door 5 minutes after you sat down, an hour after you sat down, whatever your rhythm is, okay? You have got to own the sermon prep calendar, or the urgent is going to own you. Let me give you a second recommendation. Create actual goals that have to be accomplished during those time slots. And I hinted at this. For example, Tuesday, and some of this, you might work in longer periods better or shorter periods better. Totally, everybody's different. But for me, I go in little 1 or 2 hour bursts. I specifically do 50 minutes, and then I take a 10-minute break. 50 minutes, 10-minute break. So I work in 60-minute blocks. 50 of it's work, 10 of it is breaks, regardless of what I'm doing. You got to stick to a process, okay? That's the thing. You've got to stick to your process, or it's not going to matter what you do. So you have to create goals that have to be accomplished during those time slots. For example, Tuesday, 1 to 3 p.m., I'm going to finish the takeoff. I'm going to be finished with it. If it's not done, not totally done, it's done. Okay. I'm not going to sit there and go on and on and on, let it bleed over, let it take up my Wednesday, let it take up my Thursday. I'm not going to get stuck. I'm going to finish it and make that commitment. Wednesday, 9 to 11 a.m. I'll take a break, lunch, whatever, come back. I'll do another 2-hour slot, and I want to really hammer on cruising altitude. I'm going to finish cruising altitude. I'm going to finish it. Thursday, 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. I'm going to work on landing application. Friday, I'm going to practice my sermon. Right? Oh, crazy, right? What a crazy idea to actually get up and practice. I literally have a music stand. I stand in front of it. I put my sermon on it, and I practice. And then I'll make some edits typically after that, because once I go through, I say, hey, you know, that I'm not really clear on that, whatever. Go back, make my edits, and then I practice it again on Friday. If you followed a schedule like this and you actually had a model, guess what's missing from here? Saturday prep, right? You take Saturdays off and actually have time to pray, have time to think, have time to be refreshed, have time to actually get some sleep, right? So many preachers, it's like, you're not getting any sleep. How do you think you're going to preach, you know, your best sermon if you're going on 2 hours of sleep? I mean, come on. So you got to be realistic. So you got to create goals that have to be accomplished during those time slots. And again, you're going to notice, and somebody asked this question, if you don't have a sermon model that you follow, I believe there's absolutely no way you can control your calendar. That's what I think. If you don't have a checkpoint list, different things where you know you're working through and building your sermon, there's no way you can own the calendar, I think, because you're going to be constantly like, I'm not really sure where I am. So you're going to, what do? You add on more time. Well, there's always more time. There's always Saturday night. And that's where you fall into, because you're not clear on where you're at in your sermon prep. Your calendar's going to totally just be thrown to shreds. So if you haven't done this, I recommend keeping a log for 2 months on how long you spend on each part of your sermon. What do I mean? Whatever your sermon model is, I'll just use the airplane one for me. If you don't know how much time approximately they take you, that's something else you should do. So for me, there was a time where I measured for 2 months, hey, it takes me approximately 2 hours to do my takeoff. It takes me approximately 1 hour for whatever. And you keep a log, and then you can look at some of your averages there and just say, okay, cool. This is really what it takes me right now to do my sermon, right? And I know it's cat and mouse. Some preachers get faster, you know, get ready faster than others. It is what it is. You are where you are. You need to take assessment of where you are, real assessment, keep a log for 2 months, look at it, and then adjust your calendar, again, moving ahead, okay? That's why a sermon model is so important, and why just being Thursday and going, well, I think I'm about 50% done. You will never, ever, 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 ever own your calendar if that's the mentality that you have. You've got to have a system, own the sermon prep calendar, or the urgent will own you. Number 3, get feedback on a regular basis, okay? How do you own your calendar? Get feedback on a regular basis. Feedback is what helps you know the parts that you need to work on. And so I'm really clear. I'm not saying spend all your time working on your weaknesses. I actually think you should spend a lot of time working on your strengths. But what I'm saying is you've got to know where you're struggling in delivery so that when you're prepping, you're not getting stuck there. And there's usually a correlation. So I recommend having a preaching team. And we talk about in Preaching Rocket how to build out a preaching team, how to collect people, what that looks like, how to communicate, what's the structure of those meetings, how do you take advantage of that? But you've got to have some type of way to get helpful feedback in a concise and constructive way, not getting beat up all the time. We're all hard enough on ourselves already, typically, okay? Let that feedback then inform your calendar and prep in future weeks. So if you're getting feedback months and months, hey, like your introduction's all over the place. Nobody knows where you're going. We all don't feel clear. We don't know, where this plane's headed, okay? You need to work and spend more time on takeoff and on your introduction so that you're more clear. And maybe next week or the week after, you need to send your introduction to somebody to say, is this clear to you? If it's not clear to you, I want to work on it more, okay? So let feedback inform calendar and prep in future weeks so that you can be more efficient, okay? If the same things continue to hamper you, you've got to actually work on them and develop a system to make them better, add somebody to your bullpen, whatever you've got to do. And I made this note in here, your spouse, your kids, your best friends are usually not the best indicators of where you need to grow. They are not the best indicators of where you need to grow. I recommend getting feedback. Everybody's going to be biased to an extent, but I recommend getting feedback from people who have a lot of categories for preaching, so they're not giving you feedback based on emotion. Like, I love you, you're great, the sermon was great, when it wasn't clear, okay? Or I'm frustrated with you, you kicked the dog this morning, your sermon stunk, you're living a lie, okay? You've got to make sure you've got people that can give you some type of constructive feedback so that it's actually meaningful to you and not just you're responding to other people's emotions and opinions, okay? Those are 3 ways to own the sermon prep calendar so that the sermon, the urgent doesn't own you, okay? You cannot dabble in preaching prep. You have to dominate preaching prep, all right? Think about this for a minute. If you look at the calendar and you look at just how scattered preaching prep is, and you don't have a model, so you don't know where you're going, it's dabble, 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 dabble to the finish line. You've got to dominate preaching prep. Stop being a dabbler. Your calendar and what you get accomplished during those time slots is a great indicator if you're a dabbler. Dabblers are always sprinters, okay? Dabblers who dabble throughout the week in preaching prep, dabble, dabble, urgent, takes you out of the game, urgent takes you out of the game. You're hit and miss, hit and miss. You're going to be a crammer and a sprinter toward the end. You've got to dominate preaching prep. It is a marathon. It is not a sprint, okay? You have to treat preaching like a marathon. You have to develop systems, everybody, that you can use to preach for 30 years or however long you want to be in ministry, right? The burnout is so high. This is what's so interesting to me, right? So often, if I do a webinar like this, the first critique I'll get is, hey, what about the emotion and the passion and the spirit? I get it, but guess what? Nobody is bowing out of ministry and saying, well, I just didn't have the spirit anymore. They're all saying, I got totally stressed, I got totally exhausted, and so I did this happened, I'm out. That's why people are quitting the ministry at such high rate. The majority of people that are dropping out, it's from exhaustion. And the reason why they're exhausted is from sprinting, right? You are not meant to sprint every day of the week. That's what causes exhaustion and burnout. You want to preach with a trajectory of, hey, could I sustain this system of preaching for 30 years, for 10 years, for 5 years? Do I have a marathon system in place that will allow me to be effective over the long haul? Not, can I get this done in the next 5 hours because I got to preach, it's the middle of the night or whatever it is, okay? So you've got to really focus on marathon. I want to show Kenny Davis, one of our partners, fantastic guy, and he just said this. I thought it was so cool. I saw it. I have people on my preaching team helping me develop illustrations and bottom lines, giving me my joy and my weekends back. Crucial, right? Joy in preaching. There is a direct correlation between your joy in preaching, you look forward to it, you want to do it, and the way you prep. If your prepping is loosey-goosey, all over the map, shoot from the hip, Wild West, it is going to be so hard to have joy because you are going to be stressed and you won't have confidence. So take it from Kenny Davis from South Community Church. Better systems equal better preaching, okay? Haley, let's cover some Q&A. And then if you stay to the end, as you know, we've got a bonus for you just for showing up. We're going to give you 10 ways to get unstuck. Haley, let's talk about some questions, do some Q&A. If you've got a question, put it in the chat box. I'm not able to see all of them. I'll answer as many as I can. Haley's going to help me do that.
Yeah, Sam, we've gotten some good ones in. This one is from Walt, kind of a two-part question. He says, how far in advance do you suggest that we be working on sermons? And then along with that, what would you say is an average amount of time to spend each week on that sermon prep?
Great question. It's going to be so different for everybody, Walt. So it's hard to answer, because it's just going to be different, in terms of how many hours per week. I mean, I know some preachers that can do it in 5 hours. I know some that it takes 40. Everybody's a little bit different, all over the map. So that is going to vary. In terms of how far out, a preaching calendar is crucial to do that. I recommend a preaching calendar. Preaching calendar just means you know what you're going to preach for the next anywhere from 12 to 24 months. And then you work backwards and you say, hey, let's break it up into different passages or topics or books, whatever you're going to do. And so you've got a broad calendar that you're following that translates into a 90-day calendar, preferably, then a 30-day calendar. What I am trying to do is take time where you want to actually map out your sermons maybe 4 to 6 weeks at a time. So I try to make sure I've got some type of outline in place for the next several sermons, because passages and topics are obviously related, right? And so you don't want to preach, in a vacuum where nothing's related to the next week and all that kind of stuff. And that's also, by the way, where systems are so crucial. So a lot of times preachers every week, it's like in a vacuum. It's like, how does this relate to the past six months, 6 weeks? All that kind of stuff. Well, if you have a system and you know where you're going, you have a model that you're going to follow. Number one, your people are going to understand your model. That's the other cool thing about a sermon model is your people start to know your model, which is not a bad thing. Okay, it means that they're going to be able to follow you better. So I recommend kind of working yourself backward. I would typically have anywhere from 3 to 6 outlines at a time when I'm doing full-time preaching, so I have an idea of where I'm going. I might also, what I call, look back, look forward one sermon. In other words, I'm going to have maybe my main point from the previous sermon and my main point for the next sermon, or maybe an idea of the next sermon of maybe where it's going. So look back, look forward, so that when you're developing your preaching for that week, you have some type of idea of where you've been and where you're going. You can begin to make those points. Hey, last week, church, we talked about this. And this week, we're going to talk about this. This is how they are related. Next week, we're going to cover this, right? So you're going to be doing that. That's a good way, I think, to help as well. So I hope that helps a little bit. What else we got, Haley?
Yeah, this is from Heron and Joshua. They asked about resources to use for sermon prep. So can you give some ideas of some good Bible resources, as well as some good resources to use, like real life stories and anecdotes?
Yeah, for sure. So in terms of resources, under the umbrella of commentaries, there are a lot. I recommend going on things like Amazon, or maybe finding some recommended commentary lists from different people. Maybe from, if you went to seminary, get it from your seminary. If you didn't, then I would recommend just getting it from leaders that you trust. So that way you can have a lot of confidence that their commentaries you recommend are good. I also recommend, as far as resources, there's lots of different Bible software, pieces out there that will allow you to cross-reference Greek and Hebrew quickly. There's even some that are free, like Blue Letter Bible, things like that. So I recommend having something at hand there. So commentaries, you've got software. I mean, if you've been trained, you can read the Greek and the Hebrew yourself. That can be well. And then your bullpen would be another resource. I recommend reading. This will sound kind of crazy. I recommend reading nonfiction on a regular basis. Fiction and nonfiction on a regular basis. I think those are fantastic resources, whether it's C.S. Lewis and Narnia, all the way to, a biography on a war hero. I think that those are fantastic resources to draw illustrations. One of the things I noticed with preachers is all they do is listen to sermons. All they do is talk to other church leaders. All they do is write sermons. They don't have time for anything else. And then they wonder, well, how come I can't think of an illustration? It's because you need to experience more. You need to be reading and watching current events. You need to be, reading different articles. So for me, I've actually picked something so that I can actually be focused. So I love war stories. I love CIA thrillers, that kind of stuff. Again, this is going to sound crazy, but I truly mean, if you are looking for illustrations, things to draw from, you've got to have things outside of just talking to more church leaders and reading more commentaries and all that kind of stuff. So I am constantly reading, books, so that war books, so that I have lots of different stories and illustrations to draw from. So I hope that helps.
Awesome. And then Cameron asked, you talked about scheduling out the time slots for study. How often would you recommend doing that? And would you recommend doing several shorter spurts of that, or doing like a longer focus time?
A lot of that's going to be your preference, okay, and how you work better. I found myself that I don't do well on long spurts. So I've got kind of a short attention span. I like to really get in, give it my all, and go take a break, and I'll go on a walk, or I'll go on a run, or something like that. So some of that's going to be how you work better. I would test both. What I wouldn't do is straddle the fence and go be unclear, okay? So I wouldn't go 1 week you're doing short spurts, and next week you're doing it all in 12 hours on a Saturday night, going into Sunday morning, etc. Figure out how you work best, and then work your calendar around that. I do think, for what it's worth, I think sometimes that actually, not necessarily the reading and research portion, but the actual sermon writing and writing your message, I have found sometimes that shorter spurts are better, especially to not get stuck. Because I think sometimes if you do a 5-hour session, you're staring there at the screen. I mean, even just physically, right? You're sitting there, you're staring at the screen. I think sometimes just your head starts to spin because you've been there for so long. And people don't write great things. Typically, the average person, you're not going to sit down and write it in one sitting, right? And usually great pieces are done over time and that kind of thing. So I think that when it comes to the actual writing, I believe that short spurts is sometimes a great way to make progress and build out a system. It's also easier to monitor as well. So, I mean, everything goes back to the model. Okay. If I haven't gotten that yet, the model is so crucial. Until you have a model, you're not going to know where you are. You're not going to know how long it takes you. You're not going to be able to predict anything. You're going to just be constantly shooting from the hip. So that's what I got there. Hope that helps. What else we got?
Great. Well, speaking of the model, Cameron said that he began using Andy Stanley's me, we, God, you, we format earlier this year. Would you say that's an example of what you're talking about with the simple sermon model?
100%. Yes, 100%. And there's lots of different ones out there, but for sure, that's a great way to know kind of where you are going from each checkpoint, you know, in your mind, in your sermon, so that you can follow, they can follow, that kind of thing. And again, there's not one right way. There's lots of different ways out there. But that's a great example. Airplane model. There's all kinds of ones out there. Pick one that works really good for you, or just make up your own. I mean, the mentor that taught me the airplane one, he just made it up. He asked me, "Hey, when are you going to land this plane?" And we just started a whole conversation. And I said, "What do you mean?" "Well, everybody wants to know when's this plane going to hit the ground." You know, I thought, wow, that's really good. You know, when you're traveling somewhere from point A to B on an hour plane ride or whatever, people want to know where you're going. And so anyway, what else we got?
Awesome. What suggestions do you have for those of us who are speaking maybe 2 or 3 times a week or more?
The recommendation I have is I would definitely make sure that you've got some type of system in place to get a break. That'd be one thing I'd say for sure. I mean, in today's society, it is going to be so hard to sustain that. So my first challenge is going to be just be careful, build out a system, build out a way to get a break. It's going to be very hard, and maybe experienced preachers could put this in the chat. It's going to be really hard to sustain that. You know, when you're a young gun or whatever, you can just preach, you know, till you're blue in the face. But you really want to, you know, make sure that you've got something in place. I think besides that, I would not be afraid to repeat messages as well. I don't know if that's the same context all 3 days, as in you're preaching to the same people. So it may get, you know, a little old for them. I'm not sure. But I have no hesitation recycling messages that I've done before. So begin to create a treasure chest, so to speak, a war chest, if you will, of messages that you feel like, wow, that was a great message. I really remember that well. You know, that felt really good in delivery. I'm immediately going to put that in a folder so that if I have to do some back-to-back stuff, I can pull out things that I'm familiar with. So that would be one recommendation there. Don't be afraid to repeat some content, or, you know, make your times that you're preaching shorter. So if you're doing 40, start doing 20, 30, and break up your time a little bit more. Let's do one more question, Haley, and then we're going to move on.
Yeah, this one is from Tim. He wants to know, how do you come up with what you actually want to talk about for a whole series?
Good question. And there's not one, you know, right way to do it. I can just tell you that the churches that I've been a part of leadership, we try to make sure that we're covering the different scopes, the scope of the Bible, be one way to say it. And the way that we would break that down is by the different types of literature, you know, for example, history, for example, you know, the Gospels, and following the accounts of Jesus. So we make sure that we're not just only doing 1 or 2 types of things that we're comfortable with. You know, a lot of churches don't preach on the Old Testament. The Old Testament's looked at as, you know, out of date and crazy and hard and all that kind of stuff. And so they're only doing, you know, the Gospels and maybe, you know, one of the epistles that's super heavy on application. So really, that's something that you see a lot. The way that we did it is we said, hey, you know, God put all these different books here for a reason. We're not going to shy away from any of them. If we don't feel comfortable, you know, understanding them, we're going to get resources to do so. And so we would break it up based on the different types of writing in the Bible. So we would cover different pieces of history, you know, from the Old Testament. We would cover creation. So kind of, I would just say the different pieces of redemptive histories that was our guide. And we made sure that over a 12 to 24 month period, there was enough variety there where our people would understand the whole scope of the Bible and all of redemptive history in a larger perspective, what I call the 30,000 foot view, and not just, you know, the view that we only want them to get because we're only comfortable with, you know, the Gospel of John and an epistle that's heavy on application. So that's one way to do it. I hope that helps. This is fantastic. We're going to do more Q&A at the end, okay? And we've got 10 ways to get unstuck as a free resource, and I'm going to cover that. I hope this has been time well spent. I can't even see the chat. So I'm just, if this has been time well spent, this has been helpful, just put a 1 in there. I'm going to read it later so that I need to be encouraged. We all need to be encouraged. If it's been time well spent, put a 1 in there. I wish we could cover a whole lot more. I wish I could talk to every single one of you one-on-one, but I can't. You need preaching systems, okay? You need preaching systems. Old habits die hard. I said earlier, you are not going to learn everything that you need to in a 1-hour webinar. You cannot just do webinars here and there. You need to develop a system. And what do church leaders say to us all the time? I don't have time to develop a system. I need a system. And you get into this habit of, oh yeah, I'm going to work on myself later. Listen, you have to invest in yourself. You have to work on yourself. Who is working on you? That is the question, helping you in your preaching. You're going to be excited to know we've got Preaching Rocket built out for you, a step-by-step system to help you develop powerful sermons each week. It is a module system where you can actually follow along 12 months a year and get coaching. For example, how to build a great sermon, creating sermons that stick, how to deal with criticism. We've got modules about this, literally full modules about each of these. How to develop an annual, monthly, weekly preaching calendar. The question that we just got, instead of reinventing the wheel, you can literally plug and play how to do that in one of our modules. Preaching to the unchurched, the crucial first 5 minutes, right? So we get a lot of questions about how to get people interested. Preaching that elicits a response, preaching the gospel, becoming a master of stories and illustrations, how to create a preaching dream team, how to improve your sermon prep process, the missing ingredient that will change everything, emotional, spiritual health for the church. Look, this is what you need. You need a 12-month coaching program. We get asked all the time, hey, I just wish I could get ongoing coaching on a one-on-one basis. That's literally what this is, except it's not one-to-one, but it is church leaders, pastors, designed by pastors, by preachers, for preachers, 12 modules of online learning, video, reading, community, audio, take it with you, mobile enabled, so you know that you can access and actually follow a schedule. You've got to invest in some type of preaching system. All the questions that were asked today, every single one, there's a whole module on it, literally a whole module with examples and extensive teaching, and even a community where we've got other church leaders going through it just like you are. The Preaching Rocket's designed by preachers, for preachers, for brand new preachers. They just want to start out, they want a solid foundation. Preachers that are plateaued, that are just stuck, you just feel like stale. And then preachers where things are going really, really well, but you want to multiply, you don't want to slip, you want to stay fresh. That is exactly who Preaching Rocket is for. And I always tell church leaders, you've got two choices when you're faced with a training to coaching module. Number one, I always ask yourself, is there any investment in you? If there's not, you have got to do it now so you don't continue to go on fumes, you don't get exhausted. You have to leverage a training platform, plug and play something that you know is proven, something that actually works. What you're going to get, you can see the modules stacked up. It's a total value of $3,500. What do we mean by that? We just mean that if you're going to get one-on-one coaching at your church for 12 months of the year from an authority that gave you resources, that gave you coaching, that gave you videos, that gave you worksheets, that gave you all types of resources like that, that's what you would expect to pay from somebody for all these different coaching modules. So that's the total value. And we have a bonus that we throw in when you sign up for the Preaching Rocket. We're going to give you Upfront Digital. It's a $500 coaching program. Upfront Digital is designed for you to learn how to present better. And we've got an entire coaching program around that we have today for the first 35 people. We're also going to give you 10 new sermon stories for the first 25 people that join the Preaching Rocket today. 10 new sermon stories that you can use. It's a season's worth of message enhancements that will give you, again, more de-stress in your week because you have a plan that you're following, you have resources. This is what we're offering with the Preaching Rocket. If all this did was give you one steady plan, if all this did was give you just a framework that you could actually stick with, how many of you have planned to work on yourself but have never actually followed through in a sustainable fashion? It's one thing to say, I'm going to grow in my preaching, and you do it for 2 weeks, and then what happens? Hey, the tyranny of the urgent, man, life happens. So this will give you a framework to lean on and to give you your weekend back, just as our friend Kitty Thomas said, to give you your weekend back. That is absolutely 100% worth it, so you can actually feel good about what coming on Sunday and preaching your sermon, what you're doing, your life's mission, your life's calling, preaching. You have to feel confident. And this is what we usually do, $9.97 for the general public. Just for coming to the webinar today, if you've followed us for any length of time, you know this is a drastic price reduction, $699 for the Preaching Rocket. We offer it also 3 payments of $249, where it fits in most budgets. PreachBetterNow.com. Haley's going to put it there in the chat. PreachBetterNow.com. You can see a full breakdown of the actual bonuses, the modules, what's included. There's testimonials, you name it, all the information you need at PreachBetterNow.com. Normally $9.97, $6.99 today. And we also have what we call our fast action bonus, which is just, hey, if you're willing to commit to getting better in your preaching and having an actual structure to follow, we're going to send you our sermon craft notebook. It is a physical notebook. Crazy in today's age, right? They would actually send you something in the mail, but we're going to send you a sermon craft notebook that is an actual model that you can follow, which is what a question we had earlier. Hey, how do I find the right one? Well, we're going to actually send you a notebook that can help you craft your sermons. Get started today, $6.99. I always tell church leaders, hey, do nothing. You attended this webinar for a reason. Go back, old habits die hard, or actually make a change, do something different. Is it actually worth your time to investigate? Of course. Don't continue to spin wheels. There's preachers, Michael and John. Michael's a lone survivor. He is holed up on Saturday night. He's totally stressed. He's got a smile on his face on Sunday morning, but he's totally not confident. He's dreading having to do it next week. And then you've got preacher John, who is just simply following a system. That's it. That's the difference between feeling prepared and not feeling prepared. It is simply systems. And today, preachbetternow.com, $6.99. Haley, let's queue up some more questions, and then we're going to finish here with 10 ways to get unstuck.
Great. Well, Ray asked, do you plan out your sermon focuses per month for the whole year in advance?
Yes, absolutely. Traditionally, I have, or 24 months for that matter, so that we've always know where we're going. Doesn't mean that you can't change and all that kind of stuff, but instead of making that decision last minute, which is basically, what do we want to preach on next? I think that's where you get really into the danger of just preaching on your strengths and only covering things that you're only comfortable with, and you never touch anything else, is when you don't have a plan, right? Because if you don't have a plan, similar to preaching and preparing and cramming on a Saturday night or whatever, if you don't have a plan in place and you got to make a decision for next Sunday, because next Sunday's there, you're going to always go, to your strengths, and you're going to turn it into a sprint. So that is definitely what I do. It's definitely what I recommend that you do. It will also help you develop leadership. Okay. One of the reasons why it's so crucial that you all know where you're going for a long distance of time is so that you can begin to train up other preachers, right? A lot of times it's very difficult to help other people learn and prepare to preach on different topics. If you got somebody who's new and you'd love to give them a chance to preach, well, if you don't know what the next sermon series is going to be, I mean, how can they get ready? I mean, so you've got to, that really helps too, to be able to say, hey, in 8 weeks, we're going to be preaching on this, or in 4 months on this. And I would like you to take that date and be ready. We'll do everything that we can to help you. You tell us what you need to feel prepared, etc. That's another great reason why to plan in advance, so you can build leadership more effectively around preaching.
Great, Sam. Well, kind of along with that, if you have the sermon series planned out months in advance, how do you allow room for the Holy Spirit to move and change things?
Yeah, great question. The same way as when you stack a bunch of logs as I do with my boys in our fire pit, and we could throw a bunch of leaves in there and a couple twigs, and my kids that are 7 and 5 could start trying to whittle the wood together, and we'd start a fire eventually. But hey, it works a whole lot better when we've got logs and we've got a concrete pit. And that's just the way it is with a lot of things, right? So there's this misconception that structure and spirit are at odds with each other, okay? Total misconceptions, not true. It doesn't have to be true. We've made it that way in our heads. And so I guess my answer to that would be, number one, make sure that they're not at odds in your head. If you've not come to grips with the fact that structures are okay, they are a good thing, and that even God himself is a God of order. He didn't cram and sprint. He created the earth in a specific way. Okay, so even God himself is a God of order. Then I think next step I would say, cool, like, doesn't mean you can't ever go off your script. Doesn't mean that you can't ever, follow the Spirit's leading during the middle of a sermon or anything. But it will help you make sure that you're not constantly going off your own intuition, your own emotion, which is very, very common. And I would say on the flip side, I would say there are a lot of preachers who will say, well, I'm all spirit-led, and I'll go by all passion. And that is very, very often, not a lot, not all the time, but it can very often be, it could be a cover-up for not putting in the time to prep. I mean, let's be honest about it. Sometimes it can be, I just go out of emotion. No, but you don't even have, you're not even prepared to preach. You haven't put the time in, so you're shooting from the hip, and that doesn't help your people. So I think that the fire is going to burn the brightest with a concrete pit and logs stacked up. All right, that's what I think. What else we got, Haley?
All right, here we go. Last question, Sam. This is from Rob. Going back to the simple sermon prep, how long would you recommend staying at cruising altitude?
That's a good question. Everybody's a little bit different. I do about a 5-minute introduction typically to try to get that plane off the ground. I think long introductions, or I think sometimes you finish a long introduction and people go, oh, that was just the introduction. So I try to avoid that, especially for visitors. when we talk for 10, 15 minutes and then you're like, let me get on to the main point. And they're like, oh man, I thought that was the main point. Here we go. So I try to get the plane off the ground, just like I want a plane ride to be when I'm actually at the airport. Cruising altitude, I'm going to spend anywhere from 15 to 30 minutes, somewhere in that range. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less. It's obviously going to be the bulk of time, typically, because the application at the tail end won't make as much sense if they're not drawn from the actual text itself. And so I think sometimes we have this temptation to make sure we're really heavy on application, which is great because we want things to be applicable, so it's meaningful for life. But if you're super heavy on application and you're light on cruising altitude, I believe the application, that's where we're even more tempted to, it's our own opinions and what we think it is versus, hey, this is what the text is, what the implications are. So I'm going to go, approximately 5 to 10 minutes on intro. I'm going to go approximately 15 to 30 on cruising altitude and approximately 10 or so on my landing the plane, because I want to make sure that I do cover application. It's applicable for their lives and meaningful for them. But everybody's a little bit different. So I've heard preachers give fantastic life-changing sermons that are 15 minutes long, and I've heard preachers give life-changing sermons that are an hour long. I think it is all about structure. Hey, listen, preachbetternow.com is where you can access the Preaching Rocket offer for $6.99 today. Includes all the bonuses that I mentioned up front, deliver your best presentation, and our Sermon Craft Notebook. Unbelievable opportunity to get a preaching system and make changes right now. All the questions today I mentioned, every single one is answered in the Preaching Rocket in a module with a coach, with resources, with the community to help you actually apply it and make progress. Let's talk about the 10 ways to get unstuck. And I think I just put it here in my Word document. Here you go. Okay. 10 ways to get unstuck on a sermon. I'm just going to make this big. All right. Some of them are going to be simple. Number one, we talked about it. Call someone in your bullpen if you're stuck on a sermon. Okay. Number two, get up and go on a walk and work out. Too much sermon prep is done sitting, and you become miserable. Okay. Oh, Haley says she can't see the 10 ways. That's like, I'm going to read them out loud. It's on a Word doc. And Haley, I understand you've got that document that you're going to give. Number one, call someone in your bullpen if you're unstuck. Okay. Number two, get on a walk, go work out, go on a run, do something, get up. Just literally physiologically, your body was not meant to sit there. I think sometimes we get stuck because our body's telling us, get up, I gotta get some air. So go get some air, go on a walk. Number three, look for a current event on the issue in general. Okay, let me say that again. You're stuck on a part of your sermon, application, illustration, whatever it is. Look for a current event on the issue. Give you an example from today. All right. When I talk about the importance of systems and the importance of slow and steady wins the race, right, and being consistent, I was just thinking, hey, what are good examples of consistency? I had a couple that I could have used, but I looked out in the sports world because I'm a sports guy. And who did I see? Tim Duncan, right? Tim Duncan's retiring. San Antonio Spurs. When you think of Tim Duncan, do you think sprint, high slamma jamma, upside down, dunk? No, you think, wow, same team the entire time in the NBA, multiple championships, the epitome of consistency, and on and on and on and on. That's a current event that was relevant to my content today. So researching current events on the issue that you're stuck on can help spur thinking for you, and even you can look for counterpoints, etc. Number four, move on without having the answer, right? Circle back later. That might seem like crazy. Oh, what do you mean? Literally just move on. It's not going to be perfect. It's okay. Go work on another part of your sermon. Make sure you circle back at some point, but move on. Don't wait there until you have an answer and do this thing. Well, I'm not doing anything else until I feel clear on this particular point that I'm stuck on. I mean, you could be sitting there for days, okay? And then you're going to put off the rest of your sermon, which is what happens. That's what I'm talking about. You start to avoid it, start to get pulled back more and more and more. Move on. Just move on without having the answer. Number five, give up. Trust it wasn't an essential part of the sermon. I mean, how about that? For just trusting God and saying, hey, look, if I'm not clear on this, And obviously it can't, I'm not talking about the main point of the passage. I'm just saying, if you're stuck on an illustration or you can't think of an application point, whatever it is, just don't include it in the sermon. Figure out something else to include that you do feel clear on, and just trust that it didn't have to be an essential part. Sometimes I think we get stuck on, and we feel like I'm so close to this perfect idea that's going to make everybody understand. It's going to be this life-changing moment. Look, don't over-engineer this. Don't overthink this so much that you're driving yourself crazy. Just move on and do something else in the sermon. Number 6, ask a non-Christian friend, ask a non-Christian contact what they think about the issue, right? This might be counterintuitive, and it can sometimes be difficult for pastors because we have so many Christian friends. We sometimes don't have as many non-Christian friends, but ask a non-Christian what they think about the biblical issue, whatever it is. And you will be surprised how their responses will get your wheels turning, and you will go, well, actually, I really, thanks for sharing your opinion, but this is actually what I think the text is trying to say, and this is how it applies to you. And all of a sudden, you're firing on all cylinders, right? Because somebody has given you a counterpoint. So I have done that lots of times, and sometimes it's helped me have an insight into how people actually view the Bible too, so I can be more clear. Let's see. Number 7. You can use a story to communicate the point. Stories are crucial. This is why it's so important, as I mentioned, that you're not just interacting with the same people all the time, the same circles. That's a real big danger for preachers. That's all they ever talk to is preachers. They only ever meet with preachers. They only ever read preaching blogs. They only ever listen to sermons, and on and on and on, and it becomes a vacuum. You've got to make sure that you've got other things in your life that will allow you to gather stories, whether it's reading, whether it's joining a CrossFit gym so you can meet people and work out and actually make friends with non-Christians. Whatever it is, you got to have different ways, different things in your life to draw stories out of. So you got to actually be living life, right? Which is the point of this whole content we've been talking about. Having a preaching system will allow you to actually have a life. Okay. Number 8, change locations. This is crucial. All right. Sometimes just change of setting can help you get unstuck in the sermon. If you've been at Starbucks for 5 hours drinking lattes, and maybe you've had 2 or 3, so the caffeine level's super high, and you just been sitting there in that chair, you're going to go bonkers. You're going to go crazy. If you're stuck, try changing locations. Okay, just go somewhere new. Go outside if you've been inside, vice versa. Go to a different office, work from home, flip it around, whatever it is. Change locations, pack it up, go sit somewhere else, stand somewhere else, and do that. Number 9. Get away from screens. All right. One of my big recommendations sometimes is, hey, look, if you only work on your sermons in front of screens, I mean, I'm literally saying that there are health articles that talk about how screens can impact your health. Get out a pen, get out a notebook, and if you're stuck somewhere, go try handwriting a portion of this out, just like you would in a journal or something like that. And stop typing, stop staring at screens and phones and iPads and all that kind of stuff where you're trying to use your thumbs. And just literally get out a pen and get away from a screen and go write it. Number 10, one of my absolute favorites, is I go talk to my children to see what questions they ask about the issue I'm stuck on. So, for example, when I was preaching a sermon on Zacchaeus one time, and I went and I talked to who was then 6-year-old, Canaan, my son, and I got out the children's storybook Bible, and we opened it up and we looked at Zacchaeus. And I was confused on just the different things to say about it, what was important, and boom, I have a 10-minute conversation with a 6-year-old who's asking me all types of penetrating questions about why Jesus would go to this sinner's house, why would he do this, why was he in a tree? Just started asking so many questions. Some of them are so basic, you just remember, wow, this is really not all that complex. I can be simple, and it can be very powerful, and God can work through me. I don't have to reinvent this. And so I think there's obviously a biblical principle there as well when it comes to children understanding God and the kingdom. So those are 10 ways to get unstuck on a sermon that I believe we're going to give you for being here. We are so thankful that you've been here. I mean, just very grateful. I know how busy you stay. The demands on your schedule are dramatic. And my challenge to you today is to get a system in place where you can actually look forward to Sunday, be confident about your content and what you're doing. And I'm telling you, the best way to do that is at Preaching Rocket. Go to preachbetternow.com and actually have a sermon prep structure in place where you can grow. Thank you so much for being here. We are going to make sure we get the 10 ways to get unstuck out to you. Haley, how are they going to get that, just so they're all clear?
Hey everybody, yeah, so we're putting it in the chat stream now. So if you just click on the link that I just posted, you should be able to access that document right there.
Awesome. You all, thank you so much. Go to Preach Better now to take advantage of our offer today. And we'll wait about a minute or two, and Haley will shut this down. We look forward to seeing you on our next webinar. We're going to help you grow in your preaching. Every time you show up, we will give you all we got to help you have an impact immediately in your preaching. Thank you so much for being here.